I don't feel that they're undead.
No.
Yeah, I've always thought that
Yeah.
was a bit weird.
Like
They're
they're
twice
twice
as
as
alive.
alive. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Flux.
And I'm Ben McKenzie.
Welcome to Prat Chat, the monthly Terry Pratchett Book Club podcast.
Each month we discuss one of Terry Pratchett's books with a special guest.
Today we're talking about Men at Arms, which is a book about the city guards and not a Discworld cousin of a jellyfish.
And our special guest today is comedian and upcoming author Cal Wilson.
Hi, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to get to talk about Terry Pratchett with live humans.
You're obviously a big Pratchett fan.
Yeah. I think I own most of the grown-up books, but I've got some on my iPad which I need to buy physically because I have to own all of them.
Do they all match? Like, do you have the covers?
No, I've kind of I'm zen about that now. Like my dad is a massive collector, and so I've got that gene. But I've kind of rebelling against that and going, no, it's okay to have mismatched. So I've got some of the real old titsy covers, and then I've got the kind of more dignified grown-up covers, and I've got one hardback. The very first Terry Pratchett one that I bought is a hardback, and everything else is in softcover.
Is that the one you brought with you today?
Sorcery. I was at a bookshop and there was like a bargain bin, and Sorcery was in the bargain bin for $5, and I was like, I don't know what this is, but it's $5. I'll give it a read. And then I was like, oh, what have I found? And yeah, so it was completely accidental. So I'm fond of it.
Maybe we'll have to get you back to talk about sorcery when we get up to sorcery.
Well, let's do the podcast first. I might be horrendous.
That's true. You might,
Yeah.
and you might hate us by the end of it. Who knows?
It could be a terrible time where we all just...
That's the end of the podcast. You've just done a one-episode season of Prat Chat, and I've ruined it for everybody.
We did nearly have a breakdown over Men at Arms versus Mort, so...
We should probably talk about that briefly because a lot of people did ask us why we wanted to do Men at Arms.
Because it's better than Mort.
Well, we let the readers and the listeners make that decision, and it was very close.
But what was the end result of this democratic process?
Yeah, well, Men at Arms
Is better than...
well, not better than, but is the one people wanted us to read first. But those were the two that we offered, and there were a few people asking questions like, well, why are you starting with Men at Arms if you want to do the Guards books or the Watch books? Why aren't you starting with Guards, which is the first one where they are the main characters and which really introduces them. But we didn't want to do that one first because we both agree. We think Men at Arms is a better book and a better introduction to the world. Yeah. So that was kind of where we were coming from. Did you have you been reading them recently, or is this the first one you've come back to read for a while?
This is the first one I've come back to read in a while. I just read The Carpet People, which is not a Discworld novel, but a Pratchett. I read that with my son, and it reminded me how much I love him and how much of a dance he makes out of language.
Oh, yeah.
So now that I've reread Men at Arms, I'm like, I'm going to have to reread everything.
Yeah. Well, you could read them along with a podcast if you want. Because we have decided which one we're going to do next. Do you want to give a hint as to which one it might be?
Over My Dead Body.
Okay, fair enough. We are reading Men at Arms, which is the 15th Terry Pratchett book. I should have written this down, but it is fairly late in the series. It is the second of the books to feature the Ankh-Morpork City Watch. And it's also, interestingly, one of the things I learned when looking up the book, it's the first one where Discworld appears with a copyright symbol inside the book.
Oh.
So it's the first time when they decided we should probably enforce that because someone else might come along and write a book called Discworld and then we'd have trouble.
Or open a CD shop based on when it was written.
That's true. It would have been the right time to do it, yeah, because it was published in 1993. And that was a different time, which I think we might touch on a few times during the discussion today, actually. But shall we read the blurb? Liz, shall one of us read the blurb?
Yes, would you like to read it?
Oh, I'll read the blurb.
So this whole thing is very democratic, right from the voting on what we're going to read to who's going to read the blurb.
We're very open and inclusive here at Pratchett. So this is the blurb from the back of the book. Oh, and we should say this is going to be a spoilerific podcast. If you haven't read it, we will be talking about plot points just willy-nilly. including the blurb, obviously. But, you know, we won't be giving away the joy of reading the book itself. So you should still read it, even if you listen to this podcast first. But here we go. Be a man in the City Watch. The City Watch needs men. But what it's got includes Corporal Carrot, technically a dwarf, Lance Constable Cuddy, really a dwarf, Lance Constable Detritus, a troll, Lance Constable Angua, a woman, most of the time, and Corporal Nobbs, disqualified from the human race for shoving. And they need all the help they can get because they've only got 24 hours to clean up the town. And this is Ankh-Morpork we're talking about. Ooh, it's tense, right? It's tense. Also, as I was reading that, I'm like, this is the kind of book where you've never heard these names out loud. And I'm realizing my pronunciations could be quite contentious.
Well, I was thinking about that on the way here because I was thinking, in my head, I say Angua.
Me too.
Yeah, Angua. Yeah, I think I normally say that, but then I'm more like, but surely it would be like Angua? I don't know. But Angua, I think, is better. Let's stick with that. We'll stick with that.
It's our Hermione moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And detritus is an interesting one too, because is it detritus or detritus? I would say detritus.
I say detritus.
But there you go, see, because it's a real word and it has more than one pronunciation.
Yep.
So we'll just all say it in our own way. Viewers, listeners, you're not viewers. If you are watching us, that's creepy. Stop it now. If you have impressions or opinions about the correct way to pronounce the names, please let us know. We'll talk about that on a future podcast. But I think a good starting point, I mean, we're talking about the blurb is Ankh-Morpork, because this is, you know, it's the first one we're reading, and this is the big major setting for the Discworld, and this book is all about it. What can we say about Ankh-Morpork?
Well, I'd like to talk about the river to start with, if that's all right, because I get the descriptions of it are very, very evocative, and I get kind of a bit of a queasy moment when you hear about it, because I can't stop imagining myself drinking from it, which I don't know if that's a normal thing. When you hear about a river, you go, a nice river, what would it taste like? But that's what I do whenever I read about it, and I guess you wouldn't be able to find out because anyone who drank from it would die.
Yeah,
you probably have to eat from it rather than drink from it too, like break a bit off.
That is the way it's described. It's like an unholy offspring of the Thames and the Yarra.
Yeah, I always think of the Yarra though. Like when I think of the Yarra, I think of the river in Ankh-Morpork because I think of it as being that brown kind of
murky.
It's kind of gross, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it divides, because I think the idea is I'm not going to get the map out. We've got a copy of the map, but it divides what was the city of Ankh and the city of Morpork.
It's the Albury Wodonga of the Discworld.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. And now it's one city state, because this is, you know, the world of Discworld is that sort of idea of a medieval magical fantasy Europe kind of place. And so that it's a city-state. It's not part of a larger country. It's a nation unto itself, divided by a river in the middle, with all these weird bridges that they keep finding bodies under in this book by accident. Well, what else do we need to say about the city? I mean, remembering that this is some people's first blush with it when they're reading this book, if this is the first one they're reading, as we've suggested.
I think that it's so packed with characters and so bustling and so, you know, and that you've got all the different guilds that living side by side with each other, and that you get that sense that it's been there for a long time and that it's well established and that magic is leaking out of the unseen university, and just that it's kind of chaos.
Yeah, but organised chaos, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because if you're going to have crime, it may as well be organised.
Yeah, which is the patrician's stance, the ruler of the place. And I mean, that's one thing that struck me about this book, is it's an interesting time in the history of Ankh-Morpork in the novels, is that they're still talking about how it had this golden age and it's kind of fallen since then. But this is the sort of one of the first books where it starts to progress, like the social order changes a bit during this book, which I quite like. There's all those illusions that are kind of like the real world leaking in and kind of not.
What I find really interesting, speaking of the real word leaking in, is the way that he will make an analogy about something and he will use an analogy from our world. So he'll talk about a car, or he'll talk about a telephone or something like that, which is something that doesn't exist in the Discworld, but he uses sort of touchstones from our world, which I kind of go, this is a really interesting choice to make, because that doesn't exist in that world.
Yeah, he does that a lot in lots of different ways as well. Like he even does that just with the prose. Like the prose will refer to things that are only mentioned in footnotes, because he uses a lot of footnotes to comic effect. But he'll put something in a footnote, and then 2 paragraphs later he'll refer to it as if it was part of the main text. Or one of the characters will refer to something in much the same way that he's just described it in what is clearly non-character thought, third person omniscient or narrator kind of text. And it's really fascinating the way he blends those things and doesn't seem to worry too much about conventions like that.
Yeah, like he's making his own rules.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, famously, there's somebody who reviewed one of his books, and I forget which one it was, and panned it, and said of him, he's not a real author. He doesn't even write in chapters, because he doesn't write chapter books. They're all just, they're just separated in, with a blank space between paragraphs to say, now we're in a different scene, and it gives them a very cinematic feel, I think, because it just kind of keeps going. It's not divided up into bits, which I really like. But again, he's not following the rules, particularly for fantasy novels. They're supposed to have all kinds of chapters and be numbered and all that kind of stuff.
I just can't imagine how difficult it would have been for him to break in. Because once the wall was broken down, they're like, yes, please keep giving us these books. But I can't imagine trying to sell this cold in a world where this kind of book doesn't exist. So I'm not really sure what the story behind it is. Like if he had 20 manuscripts that just got rejected all the time, or if he just got a lucky break.
I know that because I've just bought 2 for my son. He used to write columns in the newspaper that he wrote for. It's like kids' stories and stuff. So maybe there was a certain establishment. But he started writing when he was a teenager, like The Carpet People. He wrote that when he was 17 or something.
Yeah, and then he went back and rewrote it and edited it and got it published as an adult. So he's like, haha.
Now
Nobody
I can
wanted
do it.
to publish this when I was 17, but it's still good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think he must have. That we can research that. That's a thing to think about. I think we can talk about that on another episode.
But his confidence in his work comes through.
We've chosen this as someone's first foray into the Discworld. But I guess we should start because we also want people to be able to follow the plot if they haven't read the book, because we want this to be nice and inclusive. But the book is essentially a murder mystery. It's a real police procedural kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also quite quite an anti-gun violence book as well.
Yeah.
Like it's and also diversity and inclusiveness aspect to it too.
Yeah, that's sort of where you start to see that progressiveness come into Ankh-Morpork, because the Watch is taking on new members at the start of the book, and they're being, I don't know if forced is the right word, but they've been sort of determined that they have to take non-human members in. And so they have Lance Constable Cuddy, a dwarf, and Lance Constable Detritus, who's a troll, and they have Angua, who's the first...
First war. Yeah.
So the gag being that you think it's because she's a woman, but actually she's a werewolf, which is cool. Although I feel... How do we feel about them classing werewolves as undead in the book?
I don't feel that they're undead.
No.
Yeah, I've always thought that was a bit weird.
Like they're
twice
as alive. Yeah.
I like that you both thought the same thing there. That was great. I think he's done it largely to have that prejudice, which you get coming from Vimes and from Carrot, who are just dead against against the undead. And you can kind of see their point, because zombies are supposed to eat brains, or that's not really what they do on the Discworld.
They just do law and stuff, don't they?
Yeah. Is it Red Shoe?
Red Shoe. Yeah, he's mentioned in this, but not in it, which is interesting. And you do meet, there's one vampire who's the lawyer to the...
That's right. The
Ramkin family. So literally a blood-sucking lawyer. But they're not really in it that much either. But I think in order to get that prejudice in, which is a bit weird, because there's plenty of other reasons to be prejudiced against werewolves. They do kill people, or they're supposed to. Angua doesn't really seem to do that.
They seem quite rare though as well, don't they?
Certainly in Ankh-Morpork. Yeah, I mean, in later books, her name is Angua von Uberwald.
That's right.
Which kind of indicates, and I can't remember how this plays out. It'll be something we revisit later, but that her family must be a big deal in Uberwald if their whole name is Uberwald, which is kind of like the spooky Transylvanian country in the Discworld.
So do you think she has an accent?
Surely she'd have to.
It's never mentioned though, is it?
She's not written with one, is she?
No.
But because so many people come into Ankh-Morpork from so many places, maybe they all have accents, and it would just be too laborious for someone who works in accents to give everyone the proper accent.
I hate reading too much dialect. Is it Irvine Welsh that wrote Trainspotting?
Yeah.
And he writes in a Scottish dialect, I think. And I can't remember if it's all his books or not, but I was like, just no.
Too hard.
Yeah.
Well, that's
or when the gargoyles speak and they don't have any consonants and I have to read them aloud to work out what it is that they're saying.
Yeah.
I don't mind that because it's not a lot of...
It's fun. That's fun though, because you're imagining it. Yeah. It's so evocative. And we wanted to have a segment called Font Watch because there's so many different ways that Pratchett uses text to represent different voices. It's so much fun. But the gargoyles were a real favourite of mine.
I always imagine them talking with a mouthful of pigeon, and that's why they're all sort of muffled.
Yeah, it's not that they can't move their mouths, it's that they've just got a pigeon in there, yeah.
Because that's what they do.
So that's what's happening at the start, is they're getting new recruits on. But at the same time, we mentioned this has kind of got a bit of a message to it. There's this other character, Edward Death, and which is based on a real name. Like there is a real nobility name.
Diarth, I believe, is another pronunciation.
Yeah, well, that's how that's the proper way to pronounce the real name, because it's DE''ATH. And they don't like it when you say death.
No.
But I think Edward's family probably do pronounce it death.
Well, as Assassin's Guild members, they're surely...
Yeah, you're not going to be shying away from that, eh?
It would make sense. And he's a bit of a weird character, because he shows up at the start and he's obsessed with this idea that, you know, we need to get back to having a king of Ankh-Morpork or a queen of Ankh-Morpork.
Make Ankh-Morpork great again.
Like, you imagine him wearing like black robes with that embroidered on the hood. But yeah, he's obsessed with that. And is kind of the catalyst for everything that happens, but he's not really in the book very much.
No.
Yeah.
But I suppose because the gon, or however you're going to pronounce it, it's got the power, so he's just discarded. So he's not
important.
No, because the power resides in the artifact that should have been destroyed.
He's just a cipher for it. And the gon, again, if you haven't read it, is a gun. It's the first gun, the only gun that exists in all the Discworld, invented by a mad inventor who's basically Leonardo da Vinci, but is called Leonard de Quirm, and who, you know, that he built one, and then the patrician in his wisdom was like, we should destroy this. I'll give it to the assassins to destroy. I don't know, why did he give it to the assassins?
Would you not just smash it yourself?
Yeah.
Like if you were thinking clearly.
You'd think so. I mean, I kind of get the impression his thinking was assassins would not be into this. Like this gives anybody the power to kill someone really efficiently, and that kind of puts us out of a job. So we'll destroy it. But then they put it in a glass cabinet and keep it, which becomes obviously very important later on. And it's the only one. One of the things I found really interesting about the gon is it very much wanted to make sure it remained a unique thing, because then only the person who has the gon has that power.
Yeah.
It didn't want to be mass produced and become a thing that everybody had, which is quite in contrast to the kind of issues we have with guns in our society.
And there's a beautiful bit where he talks about that the person that invents the gun has to be a genius, but to reproduce it, you just have to be a clever man. And I thought it was such a great idea. I'm like, you just have to be able to copy something. You don't have to be, but to have that idea to make the thing for the first time, you have to be Leonard of Quirm.
Yeah. And I did like that it's the only thing he gives a proper name to as well.
Leonard of Quirm, of course, is brilliant in all areas except for naming his inventions. He's invented the post-it note, but the name he's come up with is handy note scribbling piece of paper with glue that comes unstuck when you want.
Well, isn't the implication that he didn't really invent it? It used him to come into being. Like he kind of felt like he was assembling something
the conduit, sort of,
that already existed, and maybe that's why it already has a name. So it's not really his invention.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And because he just scribbles it in the margin, doesn't he? It's not one of his major ideas.
Yeah.
And of course, it goes missing, and we have the whole start of the mystery with the explosion at the Assassin's Guild, which is, I mean, it brings so many nice things together, because it ties in the whole thing with Sybil Ramkin and the dragons, which is from the previous watch book, Guards. But I don't remember how Sam Vimes, captain of the watch, gets together with Sybil Ramkin. I'll be interested.
Wealthiest woman in the village, but like...
Yeah, I mean, I know what thrusts them together, which is that she's the expert on swamp dragons, and now they've got a real big dragon in the previous book. But I don't remember how that relationship starts, and she's hardly in this book as well.
Yeah, and they're about to get married.
Yeah.
But she's hardly in it at all.
Yeah.
She's got her interchangeable Emmas and there's kind of brief mentions of her, but she's definitely not a main.
Yeah. And this, in fact, I was thinking about this when I was thinking about Angua, is that she's really the only female character in the whole book. I mean, there's Sybil's in it, and Mrs. Cake is in it, but they've really only got a couple of scenes each. And so, and particularly because there's that ticking clock of, I'm 1 week away from retirement for Sam Vimes, because I'm going to get married and I'm going to step down out of the watch because I'll be the richest man in Ankh-Morpork now. Is really kind of weird, I thought. But there's then that ties her in, because the explosion is caused by an exploding dragon.
Poor Chubby.
Yeah.
Oh, so sad. But I love that thing about the dragons being like little stray dogs that need looking after. And they have the lineages and the names and the breeding, but they're kind of like one of nature's little mistakes because they accidentally explode themselves all the time. But it's that crime scene is kind of where the plot kicks off. It starts all of the traditional police stuff. He kind of throws all the different kinds of police procedural in there because Vimes does a bit of the Columbo thing where he like sort of asks a few questions and then pretends he's done and then turns around at the end and asks one more question. But also they find things by accident a lot that forces the plot along.
Stuck to Colin's foot, like later, that comes in.
Yeah, and they tread on the glass, and then they find the collar on the roof.
And Angua has her thing that she can't explain, the way that she can smell the scent because of her werewolfness, but she can't admit that to anyone. So you've got that kind of, I just knew somehow.
I'll just have a look around the corner.
Yeah.
And Gaspard and her having like a B-plot, like buddy cop movie.
Yes.
Well. Yeah.
Yeah, that is great. But also, it's when we are introduced to the Assassin's Guild for the first time, who have played a part in a lot of the novels even before this. They kind of presented as kind of just a really high-class private boys' school that just gives you an excellent education, but also happens to teach you how to kill people really efficiently, but only for money. Like it's brought up a few times that's like, yeah, we only kill people for money. Like it's a job. Like we don't.
Yeah, we're not weird.
Yeah.
Like.
And there's that footnote about how no gentleman would ever dream of being trained as a thief, but they all want to be trained as assassins. It's just creepy, but it's a weird school.
Yeah.
And I love that it's next to the Clowns Guild.
Yes.
Like that's just great. Like obviously that plays a role in the plot, but I also just enjoy that as a thing in general.
Yeah, it's hard to think of two guilds that are
less likely to get on.
Yeah,
and they share a wall, and it's just great.
You just imagine the kind of noises that you'd hear from either one upsetting the people in the other guilds.
But it also makes a kind of sense, like in a terrible way.
Yeah, the balance of
Yeah, totally.
Tragedy and comedy.
It's kind of also the first time we see the new Watch in action because we haven't seen them all together. And we do. I mean, we haven't mentioned the rest of the members of the Watch, so we've talked about the new recruits a little bit, and particularly, Cuddy and Detritus that do not get on because they're a dwarf and a troll. Then they do get on, and it's one of the most beautiful friendships in all of books. Yep. But we do see Fred Colin doing his thing, who is one of the original guards from Guards. And I don't know, I love Fred Colin.
Yeah, yeah.
He's sort of amazing.
One of nature's sergeants. It's just such a good line. He's like in every British police show, there is someone like him. Like if you watch Heartbeat, there's like Alf Fentress, who is that one who just likes to sit at his desk and eat a sandwich, and he always answers the phone and doesn't like going out at night.
No ambition. Has just reached the level of his ambition and sat there for 30 years.
And then they talk about his military background, and he always reminds me not so much of like, the sergeant in Full Metal Jacket, but more like, the sergeant in Dad's army.
Yeah.
He's more like, I'm going to be, you horrible, get in line. But you're like, but he's like a cuddly granddad.
Yeah.
And he's described, interestingly, he's not really described this way in this book, but in Guards, they constantly talk about how he's a big fat guy as well. And in this one, it doesn't really come up at all, which I thought was an interesting change.
Yeah. I think I visualise him as being sort of shaped like a bowling pin. Just not fat exactly, but unusually shaped.
Yeah. Yeah. Like not fit.
Yeah.
Not
lumpin'.
You wouldn't send him out as infantry.
No.
And Nobby's not really there. Does he go to the Assassin's Guild? I don't think
he goes to the armory.
And he's suddenly incredibly useful in the armory.
Yeah, because he's good at war.
But he kind of just mentioned a lot up until that point. And for someone who's like such a staple of all the Watch books, I found it really weird that he was in it so little for the first,
he doesn't sort of come into his own in this one, does he?
Yeah, and he's something else actually. We're talking about how the librarian maybe isn't as described for new readers, but Nobby is hard to get a handle on in this book, I think.
Yeah.
His original description was very simple, which is just that he was quite short and looked a bit like a chimpanzee, and that he was clearly very dodgy. And that's really kind of... But then he just plays that archetype to the hilt.
Yeah.
And in this book... Yeah, he's just sort of not there, and then he does that, and it's all about how he used to nick things. And
he was a quartermaster or whatever, and then, and obviously a corpse burglar.
Yeah. Someone has to go across the battlefield and steal all the things off the corpses, apparently, so it might as well be him.
But isn't it like, he's pretty, like, intent at it, like, he cuts people's fingers off to get at his stuff, like, he's not squeamish.
He's serious about it.
Yeah.
He takes his job very seriously.
You sort of wonder, how did he end up in the Watch? Like... Is it because he wants more access to
There's in Guards, they talk a lot about which is when Carrot volunteers, and which is only said a few months before this. There's a line where Vimes says, he's only been here for a few months and already everybody loves him. But when he first arrives, they keep asking him, why are you joining the Watch? Because they're amazed that anyone would volunteer. And they keep talking about the fact that everybody else is there because they're running away from something, or they just want to, there's nowhere else where they quite belong. And that it's kind of intimated that Nobby sort of ended up in the Watch because he did a bit too much thieving in the army, or he just needed to get away from getting in trouble there and find a similar job. And that Colin kind of just ended up there because he wasn't in the army anymore and there was nowhere else for him to go. And Vimes ended up there because he just kept pissing off all the people who were high up because he just couldn't keep his mouth shut about things he thought were wrong, which is what we all love about him, of course. And he's not in this book that much, actually, come to think of it.
But when he is, he makes a strong impact. Like, he propels the plot along and he's doing something really intense. So.
Yeah, and he's in it for about the first half, and then he mostly vanishes for about 100 pages and then comes back in at the end. I didn't remember that happened, and it's so weird because he's so definitely the main protagonist of pretty much all of the Watch books after this.
Well, he's at a personal crossroads, though. I thought it was kind of because he's thinking of leaving the Watch, so he's like, can I stand aside and just let this all happen without me?
What's going to happen if I do go? Can they manage?
And then he just can't, and they manage, as Carrot, but also not quite, so he has to sort of come in at the end. And
it seems like a point for the patrician too, because he's like sort of trying to bend Vimes to his will by telling him not to do something.
Yeah, reverse psychology.
But then he admits to himself that, maybe I've gone too far by sacking him, or by demanding his sword and his badge. And it is that sort of weird, not quite scene that you see in all the films where they take someone's badge off them and then they go off and do it anyway.
They go rogue, yeah.
Because Vimes doesn't do that, really. He sort of just goes and gets drunk and then takes himself out of the plot for 100 pages. But he's kind of still there in spirit, I think.
Yeah. There's moments, though, that I reckon are just so quintessentially Sam Vimes, like when it talks about the boots.
He's on the way he's just arrived outside of the Ramkin estate and Sunshine Home for a poor old little abandoned, what is it called?
Dragons.
The Ankh-Morpork Sunshine Sanctuary for sick dragons. And he's sort of comparing himself to Sybil, who's very, very rich.
The reason that the rich were so rich, Vimes reasoned, was because they managed to spend less money. Take Boots, for example. He earned $38 a month plus allowances. A really good pair of leather boots cost $50, but an affordable pair of boots, which was sort of okay for a season or two and then leaked like hell when the cardboard gave out, cost about $10. Those were the kind of boots Vimes always bought and wore until the soles were so thin that he could tell where he was in Ankh-Morpork on a foggy night by the feel of the cobbles. But the thing was that good boots lasted for years and years. A man who could afford $50 had a pair of boots that would still be keeping his feet dry in 10 years' time, while a poor man who could only afford cheap boots would have spent $100 on boots at the same time and would still have wet feet. That was the Captain Samuel Vimes' boots theory of socio-economic unfairness.
Oh, so good.
It's amazing.
So great.
I think about that at least once a month.
It so sums up his character that he is the one who has that observation.
Yeah. And then later on we find that there's a sheet of cardboard under his bed. When Angua is searching his room, she finds a sheet of cardboard that's going to be good for his souls. And also we see him knowing where he is by the cheap boots. So in a way, he has to have the cheap boots so that he can know the city.
Exactly.
And we find out what he does with the rest of his paycheck every month, which is to give it to the widows, which is just... And he'd never tell anyone, which is amazing.
Yeah. It doesn't surprise any of the old Watch members. They're all like,
No.
oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Whereas, Angua reads it and is like, he's just giving all this money to women. Like, he's clearly like...
I thought that was a weird... That was a weird moment for me of Angua being really judgmental and like he's visiting sex workers and going, well, she can't have been any good. She was only $2. Like, I don't feel like that's something that a woman would say about another woman. Like, it was a weirdly judgy moment.
It didn't seem like her character at all. Like, and especially since she lives in Mrs. Cake's house. And she also makes that comment about seamstresses, which doesn't sound judgmental. But then it's just
in that moment it's weird. And then also I think Carrot's holding on to her, I think, for the whole... Is he holding on to her, gripping her wrist or something?
After she finds out that it's a little girl and she's jumped to the wrong conclusion.
Yeah, so it's like that whole scene is kind of weird.
There's a lot of weird stuff in the Carrot-Angua relationship, actually. Like, when I was reading it, I was like, well, I like both of them, and they're both smart and attractive, and so, of course, we kind of want them to get together. But they also just feels like they're fated to get together, and there's no real chemistry.
Yeah, they wouldn't have done
them.
it by themselves.
No.
Yeah, I think in later books he kind of nails that better, but in this one it's like, you just have to be together. There's no... And the way she talks about him is just sort of observing the way other people relate to him.
Yeah, and also she's kind of, I feel like it's that, like when there was a new reboot of Scooby-Doo and they made Velma fall in love with Shaggy, I was like, no, the smart woman doesn't go for the dumb guy. Like, and I'm not saying that Carrot is dumb. He just has a very linear way of viewing things. But it's like, but why would she find him attractive? He doesn't get any of her jokes. He doesn't get anyone's jokes. He's just a nice dude. Why should she fall for him?
Also, she seems really bored on all their dates.
Yeah.
Like, she goes on them because she likes walking and stuff, because she likes going for walkies, and she doesn't seem to actually really enjoy them as a side point.
And then Gaspard says he's your master. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not into that
into
either.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, in a way, I sort of thought that was excusable because that's how a dog might
would
think,
view things.
particularly in the relationship between what he sees as a dog in Angua and a human being. But still, it was pretty off-putting. In Guards, there's this whole thing with Carrot is entirely innocent when it comes to, like, you know, sex and relationships. Like, and about 16, by the way, as well. He's meant to be very young, so he must be still about the same age in this.
Yeah,
And suddenly, like, he's
that.
all like,
Yeah,
Lothario.
now. Yeah, and also, you know, there's that bit where he sort of pats Gaspard on the head and he's like, oh, at least you've got a lady friend. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
Like, you're already lusting after this woman who just met her and you work with her. It's very weird. It's very weird.
I thought it was quite interesting how Angua has these two, for lack of a better word, suitors that are each one half of who she is, but there's no one that crosses both. Like, because I would believe Gaspard and Angua over Gaspard and Carrot in this book, because they actually have banter, they talk to each other about all kinds of things.
Yeah, and they have a real relationship.
Yeah.
And they work well together.
And she's honest with him completely about everything. So I just found it interesting that there's like a guy for each half of her, but then they eventually choose Carrot because that makes book sense, and they never sort of really explore anything else subsequently.
Yeah, and it really just does feel like when they finally, you know, have that moment and they sleep together, it does feel like kind of, really?
Yeah.
I mean, he's hot. I get that. And you're hot. But still, really? It just came a bit out of nowhere.
Also, when did he learn? Like,
Oh, yeah.
Presumably she's teaching him. Presumably she's like, oh, well, all right, I'll show you what to do.
She must be, because it's explicitly talked about in Guards that he hasn't had the talk yet. Because he's too young by dwarf standards. Like, dwarves don't talk about that until they're like 55.
Like hobbits.
Yeah, exactly. Because they live for a long time. Puberty with dwarves is all about being able to figure out beards and stuff. You know, he's raised by dwarves. He's secretly the king of Ankh-Morpork, which is a huge plot point in the book. And you never see the evidence in enough detail, but it's pretty clear in this book at least that he's the real deal.
Yeah, and they make a big deal about how you shouldn't be admiring the guy that can pull the sword out of the stone. You should admire the guy that can put the sword into the stone.
Yeah.
And at the end, when he stabs someone and the sword goes neatly into a pillar.
It feels to me like he's writing this book in the same way that we would write a good hour of stand-up.
Yeah.
Like, it's full of callbacks and references and joke structures and rules of three stuff.
Yeah.
And it's genius.
Yeah, they're so beautifully crafted and set up and then shelved, and then you find them later on. And
So I think in the plot we were talking about, and we're kind of, you know, we're going a bit loose for this, but so that you can follow along, they go to the Assassin's Guild. There's been an explosion. That's when the gun is stolen, or the gon, as it's spelt.
It's gone.
And it's gone. Yeah. Well, when they find the notes, they're like, gone. Why would you label something as gone? Like, it's not there anymore. But there's also a murder not long after that of a dwarf who is examining the gon and is accidentally killed by it. And that's the point where we meet Death for the first time in this book.
Death.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's not in this book very much.
No,
I mean,
I love how lovable Death is always. Like, he's so earnest and just really tries to do the right thing.
yeah. And it's just slightly inappropriate all the time.
Yeah.
But because you can see him, he's trying to make people feel better, but at the same time, they're dead now. So it's a serious moment. Well, the first person we see die is Hammerhawk the dwarf.
Yeah.
Oh no, because Beano dies before that. Beano the clown.
Yeah.
Will there be like whiteface and custard pies in the afterlife? It's like, no. He's like, oh, I like it.
Yeah,
It's really good.
just imagine like that clown is like, I fucking hate I hate being a clown. I just hate it. Like,
I think they all hate being clowns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except for Whiteface, I feel like he likes being a terrifying clown.
Dr. Whiteface, head of the Fools Guild.
Like, he could live down a sewer and lure children into it. Like, absolutely.
Felt very topical, actually. Written after it, but there's no really direct
crossover. No.
It's because clowns are scary and writers know that.
They are funny, but in a way that doesn't gel well with modern
Yeah, it's interesting. I took my son to see a circus recently, and the clowns were awful. And I was thinking about it, and the reason I think that circus clowns are always awful, and my apologies if you're a circus clown, but you're awful. I think the reason they're always awful is that comedy is about timing and about the push and the pushback and the sort of the conversation that you have, and so it's all about like feeling the moment and making that moment funny, whereas circus clowns have to be so precise in their movements because someone's got to fall down here and catch the other person on their feet. Also, like it takes all of the joy and the spontaneity out of it because it's so precise. So there's no room for the moment. That's why circus clowns are never funny to me, because it's like there's no spontaneity in it. It's just a regimented, learnt thing.
Which Terry Pratchett captures really well with when you enter the Clowns Guild, like they have the regimented
the
joke
things,
series that happens.
The bucket of whitewash on the thing, you've got to sniff the
sad pie that like it's too heavy and it drops on its arm. Like
they haven't even got that regimentation because everything just doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
And their heart's really not in it.
No.
It's really hard to understand why anybody is in the Fools Guild because they all seem to hate it.
I imagine it as where you send your disappointment child.
Yes, so
you have your one in the Assassin's Guild and you have one maybe, I don't know what they're doing, that's not like another good one, and then, this one hasn't quite found their way, like a Clown's Guild, like that, they'll sort him out.
The image I really loved in the Fools Guild was the faces on the eggs.
Oh.
Is that a real thing though? Is that a thing that...
Well, there's a couple of competing traditions. So there's like your modern circus clown tradition, which grew out of that sort of, the... commedia dell'arte and the clowning. That's probably not the right phrase, but you know what I mean. And they have the stock characters who use the same mask or the same makeup, like the Harlequin and the others. So I don't know that they did individualize it that much, but I like that idea. It resonated with modern comedy where, certainly in Australia, you only perform your own jokes. Yeah. Like nobody writes your jokes for you, which is why we had that tremendous controversy with that guy who was on one of the talent shows.
Oh yeah, just using
material that he found on YouTube from overseas comics. And everyone was like, isn't it just like covering music? And we're like, no, it's not. And it was quite hard to explain to some people. And it's not the same everywhere either. Like in the States, quite a lot of big name comics, as I understand it, have writers. Yeah. But they still won't perform jokes that were written for someone else. Yeah. It felt like that, like you've got to have your own face and you can't use somebody else's face. And that sort of thing that other people didn't understand but that was so intrinsic to your art form, it felt like that. And
the moment where Angua asks the clown, would anyone wear Beano's face, and they're like, I'm not a pervert, like I don't want to have this conversation. Like
it's just so unfathomable.
But that's kind of the first murder, and they find Beano's body under the bridge after they leave Hammerhawks, and they're like, what, why is he here, what's going on? And they have the really sad Fools Guild funeral.
Yeah, the ashes getting poured into the half-mast pants.
So just, and you can see it in your head, and it's just as upsetting as you might imagine.
It's like in a subsequent book when they've got they're trying to put out a fire, but it's just
just like pouring the water on the ground, and they've got a bucket with a hole in it. Yeah, it's just pathetic and sad. It's terrible. There is one other guild that features in the book, was probably worth mentioning now, which is the Alchemists Guild, where they go to find out what's the deal. Like, we can smell fireworks, but we don't know what it is. And they show them the notes. And when they arrive, they're trying to make billiard balls, and the billiard balls are exploding. And this is a real thing. When the ivory was getting rare, and this is like in I think the 30s or the 40s, they were trying to make artificial billiard balls, and they started making them out of a derivative of cellulose, which is very combustible. So they didn't explode, but they could certainly set on fire. So there's a great episode of the podcast 99% Invisible.
Oh, I love that podcast.
About that journey and finding those things. So I kind of liked how they was that real world thing, and the alchemists are all a bit weird, and half of them don't have any eyebrows, and it's nice to see a few of the guilds in this book.
Yeah, and the Beggars Guild as well. We meet the
the Beggars Guild, and the Dogs Guild.
Yeah.
I mean, are we all dog people here?
I'm a cat lady.
I've got a cat, but I like dogs, so...
Probably I'm more of a dog person than a cat person, although I like both. But I can't imagine a cat's guild.
Well, they wouldn't take leadership from one person. Like, they'd all just be like, you're not the boss of me.
They might have a meeting.
I don't know that any of them would turn up.
Yeah.
Like...
There's a story about how in the Chinese zodiac calendar, there's a dragon, but there's no cat. And the story behind that is that the cats were like, I'm not going to come to this meeting where we assign these things out.
That's great. I didn't know that. But the Dogs Guild is horrifying because it's not really a Dogs Guild. It's more a kind of terrible
It's a wolf pack role play.
Interestingly enough, I once played in a live action role-playing game where I was a werewolf. And that wasn't very much like real wolves either.
It's like what I imagine the alt-right meetings are like, of like all the misfits that have had no love and just want to feel important and strong, and they're taking orders off the shittiest, littlest one that's got the most anger issues.
Yeah.
And they're trying to be something else but their idea of it isn't what it is in reality.
Yes. Their dream of it does not match up to the real life. And that contrasting when Angua is there and she's talking about
what a wolf pack is really like.
Yeah. You know, we don't do things because the leader says, we do things because our instincts are all in tune and we all jump at the same time because that's the right time to jump, not because the leader says jump. But yeah, horrifying. Feral dogs are truly scary.
Yeah.
And the idea that, you know, Big Fido, leader of the Dogs Guild, is this satanic poodle with like glowing red eyes. Oh, creepy. And I liked that was the payoff for Gaspode when he mentions having the power. And I sort of had a vague memory of what it was. And then when it's like the fact that he can give human commands to other dogs, it's like, oh, cheeky. It's like, sit. You're a bad dog. And they're all like, oh, I am a bad dog.
But that also puts him that kind of half and half universe that Angua occupies as well, because he's got the human, he lives in the human world, but half in the dog world. And he's trying to occupy both of those spaces by, you leave me alone, you guys, you dogs, leave me alone. I'm fine. But then having to pull out his human voice and be on the dark side kind of.
There's that main plot of that mystery. And then that's sort of all these other things like the Dogs Guild and the Alchemists, and they sort of just...
They fit in naturally.
He finds really good ways to fit them in, which I thought was really great. Is there a B plot in this book, do you think? Or is it really all A plot?
I suppose it all has to be A plot, doesn't it? Because like the wedding is kind of takes a back seat, but that's the impetus for getting Sam Vimes into action. And
he needs an event where the patrician is going to be out in public. He doesn't normally go out in public, and a big society wedding is it. So that's his chance. And so it makes sense that that's when it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And why also he tries to kill Vimes before that. That's actually a pretty traditional Pratchett thing to not really have a B plot. Just have an A plot and lots of other interesting things that connect into the A plot along the way.
Maybe troll intelligence as a B plot somewhat.
Yeah.
Well, the friendship between Cuddy and
the helmet, which becomes like,
and the evolution of the watch. But also the helmet. Oh, let's talk about Cuddy and Detritus.
Yeah.
Because they hated each other so much, but then they did so much for each other.
They're a dwarf and a troll, and they're set up as sort of the intense
natural
ethnic
enemies.
rivalry, like with a history. And I think one of the things I like about it is because I was thinking about, is it an analog for something in the real world? And it doesn't really fit any real world relationships, but it clearly is a stand-in for anything. It doesn't matter. Like it's just two peoples who, for whatever historical reason, do not get along. But then you put two individuals in there, and maybe they can have a friendship
and make each other's lives better. Because Cuddy actually does improve. Like he figures out things about Detritus to make him more intelligent, and make him function in the world better, which like they actually actively benefit in other ways.
I knew Cuddy died, but I did not remember that he died in the same book where you meet him, and I was not ready.
No.
I was very sad. I think as it was getting closer to that point near the end of the book where he was going alone up the tower, I was like, oh no. Yeah. Oh no, it's going to happen. And then after he's been killed, and just Detritus is so sad.
Yeah.
For that moment before he gets angry, he's sad. He's sitting there with his helmet looking at it. And he calls it helmet made by my friend Cuddy, and you're like...
It took me too long to accept that he was actually dead because I had conflated him with the character.
Yeah.
And then when Death comes in, I'm like, oh, Death doesn't usually make mistakes. Can't wait to see how, like, this isn't happening. And then it just kept on... I was like, oh, no, it's real, isn't it? He's really not coming back.
Yeah, we've really lost him. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the thing that Stephen King does as well, really beautifully, of making you love a character and then taking them away from you, which I think is a really... Because that's what happens in life, like you lose people that you love and it doesn't all work out fine and you don't get saved at the last minute. And so you invest so strongly in them, but life isn't fair and death comes and takes them away. And I really love he gives us something that's so familiar in a world that's so alien, but like we recognize everybody in these books.
Yeah.
And people die, which, people die.
Yeah. Oh.
And it's upsetting.
Yeah. It is upsetting. Yeah. And it really is upsetting. Like the other characters who are killed in the book, you feel sorry for them, but we don't really meet them before it happens. But we know Cuddy so well, and he has all those great moments. Like when they're locked in the Pork Futures warehouse is the key moment in the book for them, which again is part of the kind of accidental policing narrative where they just have happened to be in the right place at the right time. and they find the right clue, because it's after they leave the Port Futures warehouse that they fall down the hole and end up in the sewers under Ankh-Morpork, which is such an important part of the book too. They're very instrumental plot-wise, and you have this nice buddy cop thing going on with them, and they become friends, and then one of them dies.
Yeah. And then there's also that beautiful thing of like when they just start conscripting everybody, and so it's like we've got too many trolls, we need more dwarves. So they are the epicenter of the movement for understanding, I suppose, between the two species.
And Detritus just becomes a monster.
Yeah,
So good.
Yeah, it's like he's just been getting instruction from Colin. You horrible troll.
Yeah,
they're very Tolkien influenced. The dwarves are basically people who are a bit short and they like gold and they live in caves. The Discworld books are always about people, even when they're about magical beings, and they're still people.
Yeah.
And the trolls are an interesting one because they're the most sort of sci-fi fantasy kind of thing in there. And he doesn't go with something more popular or more common like elves or orcs, but he goes with trolls. And they're very Tolkien-style trolls who are made out of stone or revert to stone. And this is the one where he takes that and uses it to his advantage. And basically using his love of computers as well. Because what he's doing when he's in the Port Futures warehouse is Detritus' brain is being overclocked. It's just being cooled down to go faster.
Do you think that trolls have a base 4 number system because 2 hands, 2 feet as a side point? Because it's like 1, 2, 3, many.
Yeah.
Like many 1, many 2, many 3, many. So like that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and and you see that come back, the base 4, because he's talking about we need 16 more trolls, and he goes, no, he says, give me 16. No, make it 64. Okay. Clever. They might not all have the same number of fingers. You don't know. They're always described a bit differently, the trolls. Getting back to Cuddy's death, though, the other thing I found quite sad is that Death says, you don't have to haunt the world as a ghost. And he says, well, what if I want to? Does that mean he's going to stick around? What? But then you don't hear from him again.
Yeah.
And I'm like, does he show up later on as a ghost? I don't think he does.
I don't think so.
No.
So it's really unclear what happens to him after death.
Ghosts? Are there ghosts in Ankh-Morpork?
I think there are ghosts. I'm sure there are ghosts in the Discworld.
Can they interact with the real world? Because there are people who choose the in-between.
That's true. And you know what? I don't remember. I can't. It'll probably come up in one of the books when we read it. But certainly in this one, it's typical Discworld death. Like you talk to death for a bit and then you go on to whatever you imagine the afterlife's going to be like. But yeah, it's really unclear with Cuddy. And I wonder if he was setting it up so he could bring him back as a ghost. Because I'm sure there is a ghost in one of the books. I seem to remember that. But I thought there was going to be more of that.
Yeah.
And then nothing happened.
But then I guess we end up with Cherry Longbottom, don't we? As our favourite dwarf.
Yeah. She's
in
pretty
the watch.
great.
Yeah.
Who I thought was the same as Cuddy, which is why I was extra shocked by the death.
Oh, no.
I just remember them as the same.
That would have been a good reveal, though, if he'd been like, Cuddy, hold this book, and then the next book is when, well, actually, I'm a lady dwarf. Because they constantly refer to, in fact, in Guards, when there's a lot of stuff with dwarves at the start, they talk about how they all have beards. They only use one pronoun, and it actually says, so essentially for dwarves, gender is optional. And they touch on it in this book a few times, but not in any detail.
Cuddy and Chubby are like some of the worst losses in this book.
This is not about this book, but the last Terry Pratchett, I Shall Wear Midnight. Is that the...
Oh, the Tiffany Aching one.
Tiffany Aching one.
Yeah.
So there's a death in that. And when I read that, I cried and cried because I felt like it was Terry Pratchett dying. Like I felt like, for me, that was like, oh yeah, this is the end of Terry Pratchett. Like, it's very beautiful and great, but...
Was it you who was reading it when he died?
I was reading Raising Steam, and I was halfway through it, and it was in my bed, and I woke up and I flipped through my phone being like, what great things have happened in the world today, internet? And it's like, Terry Pratchett's died. I'm like... And I didn't pick one up until this is the first Terry Pratchett book.
Yeah, I really grieved when he died. Like, I was like, oh, all that joy that you've brought so many people, and what an amazing mind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, the plot goes on even if Cuddy doesn't go on.
Yeah.
We sort of touched on the police investigation. They find clues. A lot of them they find by accident. And it's quite a clever plot in the sense that it's kind of half a Columbo style. We know who's doing it. And we know what they're up to because it's kind of explained to us at the start when Edward's like, this guy, Carrot, he's the real king. He's the heir to the throne. We should reinstate him. I'll do it by killing off these key people. That clearly seems to be his plan. And then they find his body. And you're like, wait, it's not him.
Yeah.
And there's that moment where they find a second corpse of Beano, and that's when they have to go to the Fool's Guild and say, well, did someone else paint up with somebody else's face? And they're like, well, he got away with it because no one would think of, in the Fool's Guild, would imagine anyone doing that. But then it's not him. And it is a mystery. And I fully confess that when I was reading this, I knew there was some twist in the story, but I could not remember who it was, and I did not have any idea until it was revealed. Was it a surprise to you as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel it was an earned surprise? Like, do you think it was set up enough as to who it was?
It's definitely, if you're going to compare it to a horror movie, it's a jump scare rather than a suspenseful build-up, I reckon.
Yeah.
My theory on that is that it didn't matter who it was. It was whoever he brought the gun to.
Yeah, yeah.
It would have been them because the gun is so powerful and the only person who can resist it is Carrot. So I kind of liked that you couldn't guess who it was because it didn't matter in the end.
Well, that makes sense because it ends up being Dr. Cruces, the head of the Assassin's Guild. I think the moment where it really worked for me was when Vimes gets a hold of the gun and he starts doing the classic kind of Hollywood swinging around to cover someone, shooting at them as they run away, like the kind of stuff that detectives do in Hollywood movies and TV shows, because this is not what he's normally like. He's not like trying to kill people. And that was quite shocking.
Vimes is fighting the gun, but he's doing this stuff like he shoots the ceiling and then shouts, "The law, you sons of bitches."
Yeah.
Like, it's getting into the stereotypes kind of thing of a shoot 'em up.
Then there's lots of moments like that throughout the book. Like there's the one where they're in the armory. It's basically that scene from the Terminator where the Terminator goes in and he says, "If you've got a phased plasma rifle," and the guy's like, "Just what you see in the store, pal." And the guy in the armory says the same thing to Nobby. So it does bring in those archetypes. But it's when Vimes picks it up that it goes for broke. Yeah.
And I was also really satisfied by when they are dealing, like they've got the gun. It's before that. The gun is kind of talking and says, "I'm merely the gun. Guns don't kill people. People kill people."
Yeah.
And it's like, thank you for putting that in there. Like it's a great reference point.
It comes back to that idea that the gun doesn't want to be replicated because it wants to be the only gun. And therefore only the person who has the gun has that power, and it doesn't want that power distributed to the masses. Even though, they have crossbows. By the time we get to the later books, like they've got things like steam engines as well. Like there's that sense of progress through the books
and the clacks and all that kind of
which is which is a thing that sets it apart from other fantasy worlds. I feel because in so many fantasy worlds, a big thing is that it's always the same. And it's been the same for thousands of years. Where in the Discworld, you get the feeling that there is history there and it has been the same, but now is the point where things are changing.
This is the century of the fruit bat.
yeah, that's right. And you get that essential Pratchett thing too, where something from our world is leaking into the Discworld and just screwing it up for everyone. And in this book, it's the gun.
Isn't it interesting though? Because Edward, the original guy who got the gun, his whole thing was trying to get one person in power, like Carrot, bring back the kings, and he ends up bringing a different kind of one thing in power into being through trying to do that. So it's kind of an interesting comment in its own way.
You mean like is in like reinforcing the rule of the patrician? Is that what you mean?
No, it's kind of because he wants a king to be in charge. He wants the one person who has all the power to be overseeing everyone. He ends up bringing the gun in to do this, but then the gun kind of in its own way becomes
all
the
the
power.
Gun is the thing with the power. Yeah, no, I see what you mean.
So he creates the bad side of the thing he was trying to do on his own. Because if Carrot became king, frankly, that would be fine. But only Carrot is the lineage. That's the problem.
When one person has absolute power, then anyone who works for them effectively has absolute power. And so there is a passage about that where he talks about you better hope the second in command of the king is also a good man.
And there's the parallels with the gun and who's the conduit for the gun. So
Vimes goes off and he starts shooting at people and stuff, but he also manages to put it down when Carrot tells him to. He plays it kind of ambiguous. How much of that is Carrot's natural sort of ability to be obeyed and how much of it is Vimes' own sort of ability to not do the wrong thing, which I thought was nice.
Yeah.
In this book, he obviously hates kings and he has that one rant, but it's not quite as frothing at the mouth as in some of the later books when he talks about it. He gets even more anti it. It's weird in a current political climate where we have a lot of people who seem to really be flocking to that kind of more autocratic thing. It's a big theory about one of the reasons why Trump is so popular. It's not so much because of the things he says he's going to do, but because of the way he presents himself as a leader who doesn't listen to anybody else.
But it's in Vimes' blood to hate kings. So
yes. And I like how they do tell you it was a Vimes, but
Yeah.
Vimes doesn't tell us it's a Vimes.
Yeah.
He's like, he is proud of it, but he's also ashamed of it at the same time.
I can't figure out if the king that his ancestor killed was actually nice or if that's all like a ruse, because it's ambiguous. It's like, the kind-faced one who's surrounded by children and stuff.
No,
I'm like,
I reckon he's saying that he was a pedophile.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was like, but is it?
Oh, no, because they talk about the cleanup afterwards where they found the secret rooms and all the devices, and like he's clearly also torturing people.
Very bad. Okay.
Yeah, very bad. But named in a way that was ambiguous so that the populace could believe otherwise if they wanted to.
He's something the kind or something.
Yeah.
Lorenzo the Kind?
Something like that. Yeah,
I think that's it.
Oh, yes, says Vimes carefully. He was very fond of children.
Yes, that's the...
Yeah. It's interesting things like that. There are moments like that too where, like, it's quite an innocent world, and then there will just be these moments where something adult sort of creeps in a bit, like, or there's like a description or something of Angua saying something about like having extra nipples, and it kind of jars a little bit with the lightheartedness of the...
Yeah, like there's one line where someone says shit. Oh, it's when Detritus is in the sewers.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and even shit gets its own street.
Yeah, which is great. Oh, and it's like, it's the one time there's a real swear word, and you're like, oh.
Because Carrot can't even say damn. They put an asterisk over the A.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's something like nice bitch for Angua as well. And it's like, that. Oh, no, don't do that. Like...
Yeah, that was jarring too. And as much as it's like that old joke where it's like, what? It's a
female dog.
Dog. You're like, yeah. Speaking of things that sort of took me out of it just a little bit, as soon as they start talking about the gun, it's really hard to talk about guns without using gun-specific language. So after people have shot at Cuddy and Detritus, they start talking about how they were shot at. And I had myself thinking, is that how you describe it if someone fires arrows at you? Do you say, I was shot at? Or would you have?
Shot with an arrow.
If you were normally... I mean, a lot of the terms are similar to, like, particularly crossbows, which is what the watch has. But I was just like, is that right? Because it sounds like talking about a gun. And how would they know to say those things? But they never... I don't think they ever use the word bullet.
No.
They don't even use the word slug. I think they just sort of referred to as pellets or something.
Yeah, they do use the word slug.
Oh, they do use slug?
Because I noticed that on slug. I was like, is that what you would call it? Because you wouldn't know that it was a slug. And it doesn't look like a slug.
No, because they always find the ones that have been fired, so they're flattened into a disc because they're made out of lead.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's stuff like that comes in, and it's a bit weird. Yeah. But mostly it's pretty good.
I mean, it's fantastic. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
We're
nitpicking.
Oh, it's a really good. But that's our job, like.
Gotta find something.
We get to the end of the plot. We find out who done it. And we have that confrontation where Vimes gets the gun, but it's not Vimes who kills the bad guy.
No, it's Carrot.
Yeah. How do we feel about that? And what about Carrot's whole thing? Like, once disorder sets in because the Day Watch is called in to take over from the Night Watch, they're stood down and they arrest Coalface the Troll for killing Hammerhawk the Dwarf, which he obviously didn't do. And then that sets the racial tensions between dwarves and trolls off, and they start to fight in the street, and there's unrest. And that's when Carrot's like, there's rules for this.
Yeah.
Would you say? And he asks about 3 or 4 times before he gets an answer that satisfies him. And then he's like, well, we're a citizens' militia now, according to the rules of Ankh-Morpork. And everyone's like, what? And that's when he kind of takes over as a king. How do we feel about that side of him and that really coming out?
I feel like he is the city. He's like the physical manifestation of the city.
Wow,
like,
yeah.
So everything he does is for the city, and like, Angua makes thinks that, he's giving her a city instead of flowers. Like, everything he does is for the city, and he's always talking about polis and, where policeman comes from and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like it's surprising that he kills someone, but it makes sense because he's the city.
Yeah, it's what needs to happen for the good of the thing. And he's not a watchman at that point, so he's a militia, I guess, as well.
Yeah.
And I think he also doesn't he do it because Cruces makes a move for the gun or something? Like, he doesn't just kill him.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, because Cruces has got the gun back by that point.
And he's about to shoot Vimes,
Yeah. Yeah, and it's that callback to, like, a good man will kill you without talking about it first. Yeah. And he does. And that's where the sword goes into the stone. It's a shocking moment, but it feels satisfying. And particularly in later Pratchett books, the bad guy often doesn't get killed. Or if he does, he gets killed kind of like that Doctor Who thing where the Doctor doesn't kill the bad guy. He tricks them into killing themselves.
Yeah.
Like through their own greed or meanness or whatever. And that often is what happens in Pratchett books too. Or they just sort of go away.
Or they're redirected into something.
We don't really see the wedding in the end, do we?
No.
I was a bit disappointed. I was like, we've been building towards this the whole time, and just like, no.
And we never even see Sybil at the wedding. Like, because it all goes off the rails before she turns up. And then they kind of have to hastily have a sort of other wedding.
I feel like she'd handle it well, though, because she's very pragmatic.
Yeah.
That's true.
And I do like the way that Sam Vimes is like, he really wants to talk to her because she's like the perfect person to talk to, but you're not supposed to see her on the wedding day, kind of. Like, I like what that says about their relationship.
And you do get that relationship only through sort of little hints like that. But it does seem, you just get a really solid feeling from the little that you hear that this is really good for both of them, that they're both into it.
Yeah.
And she's oddly, for someone who works with dragons all day and is clearly quite progressive in some ways, she's very old-fashioned.
Yeah, to want to sign everything over to
and sort
Vimes.
of, and partially at least take his name as well.
Yeah.
It is a bit weird, but at the same time makes sense for the character.
Yeah.
Can I just say how much I like that her last name is like an oven-safe dish and
Yes.
she works with dragons?
Yeah.
I'm sure that was intentional.
Yeah, I just
Surely
love
that's
that. It's
intentional.
just such a good little detail.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
I love the little realizations too that sometimes you don't pick up until you've read it a couple of times.
Yep.
And you go, oh, I've missed that.
But going back and reading Pratchett now, some of these books I haven't read for 20, 25 years. I'm like, oh, this is good. I don't remember this bit. This is great. Oh, I get that joke now. We haven't talked about Mrs. Cake very much.
Oh, don't ask us about Mrs. Cake.
She's great. That's probably one of my favourite jokes in the whole book is when Mrs. Cake's trying to tell Angua that someone's at the door for her and she's saying things that haven't happened yet. And Angua's like, Mrs. Cake, you've got your precognition turned on.
Yeah.
She's a lovely old lady.
Yeah.
She's just nice in
like,
this book.
Like her home is a safe haven for people who are outcasts or people, like she doesn't judge anybody. She's
like
just
Miss
accepting.
Peregrine.
Yeah.
She's like a Airbnb, or just a normal B&B from like the 90s where they'd leave out a tray of mince pies for everyone who's a guest. Like, it just seems like a nice place to live where you're looked after and treated like you're a visitor, not a paying sort of tenant.
And that she's got like a tray of gravel for the zombie. Is it the zombie?
It's the
she's
vampire.
got the vampire,
She's
because he's got a
changing
bad back, so
Yeah.
she's changing the dirt in his coffin, but she's got some gravel because it's orthopedic or something.
And she usually leaves a little window open at the back for werewolves to get in.
But
Yeah.
Because
paws
her
that can
daughter's a
operate.
werewolf.
Yeah.
Which is only mentioned in passing, but you're
Yeah.
like, oh, that sounds like it might be important. And I know she comes back in later books as well, particularly the ones where Red Shoe features a lot.
I just want to know what happened with her in the post office that she's mentioned on their sign twice, because I don't think we ever find out why she's specifically on the list of things that the post office will not talk about.
Yeah, but I really enjoyed that the post office was mentioned here, and it's the first time he makes that joke about the motto, the glom of knit.
Yeah.
And all that stuff where it's misspelled and it doesn't quite make sense. Then it's really not mentioned again until going postal.
Yeah.
It's the plot of a whole book, like revitalizing the postal service, which here we learn used to be great and now has just fallen totally into disrepair.
It's nice to imagine them walking past and Stanley's in there with his pins, like at this point.
Yeah.
Because the passage of time in the books is an interesting subject because, like I said, this one is, I think, about 4 months after Guards, but it's published like several years later, so it's never clear what that timeline is.
Yeah.
He just decides how much time needs to have passed for things to have happened to get the story to where he wants it to be. But 4 months is not a long time for Carrick to have arrived,
Matured.
become a member of the guild, the Watch, and then just met everybody.
Yeah.
And he can't be more than 17 years old now.
Yeah.
So it's like,
But I do love that way that he's one of those guys that knows everybody, and like he's been up to hang out with the gargoyles, and that he is just so beloved.
Yeah.
So fast.
And people don't even know why they like him.
Yeah.
They just know they do. Because I think we all know somebody like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, cut me own throat dibbler.
Yeah.
I love that when he shows up.
He's got a nice cameo in this book. And I quite enjoyed that he was in it more than just a passing reference as he is in a lot of the books.
Yeah.
Because he's just such an archetypal bit of the Discworld. Like I'm pretty sure he shows up in the first one in The Colour of Magic, and then he's just there. And then there's all the like versions of him on other countries, on the continents of places. But yeah, this is him at his simple best. Because in Moving Pictures, which was only a book or two before this, he has that whole thing where he becomes the Discworld equivalent of a Hollywood producer, and now he's back to selling sausages in a bun on a street corner.
And he absolutely sells bottled of water from the river. Like, they never say that, but he absolutely does that.
Yeah, totally. From the source. He probably doesn't sell it as water, though.
Yes.
It's like, I don't know.
Garnish, mustard. It's terrible. Every time I read his thing, I'm like, I could really go a hot dog.
I do that as well. I'm like, I would like one of those.
Yeah.
Something with tubes in it.
Yep.
Yeah. And I just, oh yeah, like last time I went to like get a kebab.
Oh, and he tries to, he's equal opportunities to everyone. He doesn't care who his customers are, so he tries to cater to the trolls, and they're like, oh, this has all got lichens through it and stuff like that. Like
this shale is stale. Like what?
It's like, how can it be stale? It's a rock. And you're like, you have not researched this, but you're giving it a go, so that's all right. I liked how there are callbacks to guards, but they're mostly very subtle. Things like when I think it's Vimes who's saying, oh, you know, this is a mystery. Or maybe it's Colin actually. He's talking about how he prefers a dragon to a mystery. It's like with a dragon, you know where you are. Like you just sort of point your arrow at it and try and shoot it. But a mystery is not really his deal. And of course, Foul Ron turns up.
Yeah,
bugger it.
Yeah, another one of the classic characters is in so many of the books, but is not a major character. But he does say Millennium Handed Shrimp.
Yeah.
He doesn't say bugger it though, I don't think.
You know he does.
Oh, does he?
Yep.
Oh, he does.
Yep.
Oh, good. Oh, it was great. It was like meeting old friends.
Yeah.
Because we've read them before, and you know, you're reading this book, and they just sort of turn up, and they're not really a major part of the plot. But you're like, oh, I know you. Oh, it's how nice to see you. Yeah.
I felt that way about Gaspode. I was like, I'd forgotten about you, little stinky talking dog.
Yeah.
I get disappointed at how badly he's treated by people because he's always having to be like, oh, like making people feel bad in their heads for kicking him. I'm like, as they should, like feel bad. Yeah,
it's fair. Nobody likes to see a dog getting kicked. That's why we talk about kicking puppies as the thing only truly evil people do. And the patrician has a lot to do in this book too.
Yeah.
And he's one of my absolute faves.
Yeah, I love him too.
I like also at the end of the book, like as much as it's a comedy and it in some ways has that kind of sitcom mentality, it's not a sitcom in that you never get to the end of a book or very rarely you get to the end of a Pratchett book and things aren't different to how they were at the start.
Yeah.
And that's particularly true, more so true actually, of the Watch books than any of the others. Because their story is always about the evolution of them as a police force and the evolution of the city itself. And so at the end of the book, instead of having, you know, a watch with like 6 people in it, you've got a watch that's being restored to a full force of 56 and is going to have all these different watch houses. Yeah. And now there's going to be a commander of the watch, and Vimes is being given a knighthood that's forced upon him because he otherwise can't be commander of the watch. He keeps getting promoted in every other book, but this is the one that changes his level of authority. Now he's in charge and people have to recognize that he's in charge, and he has the power to change things the way he thinks they should be. And you even just that last scene in the book where he's doing the planning,
yes.
You're like, oh, this is kicking off something.
It makes me wonder how much forward planning he did when he was writing, like like how far out he'd planned. Like, you know, I'm going to revitalise the post office, I'm going to start a newspaper, the watch needs to get bigger, or whether it was a more organic process than that, or whether he did have it mapped out for the evolution of the city.
Yeah, I think I get the feeling it was probably quite organic, but it feels like it could have been planned.
Yeah, because as it goes on, like, you know, with the raising steam and everything, it's like, oh, there are these big moments of evolution in a society, like, and that again seems so familiar and resonate so much because you can see the parallels and, you know, where we've come from and where we're going and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
totally. My brain.
Yeah.
So I think it's safe to say we all thought this was great.
Yes, absolutely.
And as an introduction to the world of the Discworld, do we think it worked well?
It puts you in the deep end, but also it explains who everyone is and how they fit in. So I think it gives you a good cross-section, like a taster plate.
Yeah.
With murders.
Yeah, the only people that you don't meet are the witches. Like, you don't meet Granny Weatherwax or anyone like that.
Is Carrot the hero of this book? I liked what you thought about how he is the city, but he is also presented as kind of the heroic.
He's presented as the hero, but he's also presented as the hero who doesn't want to be the hero or doesn't need to be the hero.
And he brings out the good in other people. Like, he's
the catalyst, isn't he?
So he creates heroes-ish.
And it's like an ensemble solution.
That's one of the key differences, I think, between this and the other Watch books, is that Vimes is very much the protagonist of those books. And he has, like, his, you know, team, but he's the one that drives those stories. Whereas in this one, he takes a real backseat for quite a lot of the book.
No, it's kind of like the episodes at the end of a season when you know an actor is having a contract dispute and they sort of do episodes to see if they could write them out. And then the audiences are like, no, we won't have
We
this.
need him.
And then they're back with force. And obviously that's not what happened in this book, but that's what that chunk where he's missing feels like. It's like, could we? No.
I mean, you might think it was too early for that, but in fact, at this time, around the time this was written, there was an online fan community for Terry Pratchett on newsgroups, because it's 1993 we're talking about, and Pratchett was interacting with them. So he knew about them. In the dinner party scene, when Vimes is like getting annoyed at the way that other people are talking, there's certain elements of the way that they're arguing that are drawn from the way people argue online. The particular thing that was like what happened on the internet is that someone says, in my humble opinion, and Vimes is like, I don't think there is such a thing as a humble opinion. And you're like, yeah. Do we have any real favourite lines or moments that we want to talk about? Favourite joke?
I just really loved this sentence. It began, as many things do, with a death. Like, what a beautiful start to the story. Like, it's such the possibilities just stretch out immediately in front of you, and it's just such a simple piece of poetry.
He does have a great turn of phrase.
Oh, beautiful. Just delightful.
And such amazing craft. How about you?
I loved he could think in italics. Such people need to be watched, preferably from a safe distance, which I actually put as my my email signature for an embarrassingly long period of time when I first read it.
One of the things I liked about that, this is another callback that I noticed, was it talks about how he thinks in italics and that's dangerous, and then whenever the gun is speaking, it's in italics.
Yep.
Yeah, I thought that was really good. Oh, the bureaucratic writing whenever they're talking about the rules in the watch, and when Colin's listing the things that you get.
Yeah.
And he's got like one badge, comma, office of, comma, night watchman's, comma, copper. Like, that is so over the top. It's delightful.
And I really loved, and this is a phrase that has stuck with me for many years, licky end, where Gaspard talks about a complaint that he has.
Oh, yeah.
And licky end is just so, that's what little dogs do. They just have licky end. Like,
what about footnotes? Does anyone have a favourite footnote?
Troll counting system.
There are so many contenders in this book. The first one that I like is the one about atheists swearing.
Oh, that one.
Oh, yeah.
Random fluctuations in the space-time continuum.
Yeah, actually, I'm not even sure that's a footnote, but it's one of my favourite gags. It was just like, it takes somebody who's very disciplined in their atheism to not say, oh, God, this hurts.
I really love the footnote about what ook means when the librarian says ook. So, librarian, formerly human, now orangutan, working on a human orangutan dictionary, had got as far as ook. And then the footnote is, which can mean, well, meanings include, pardon me, you're hanging from my rubber ring. Thank you so very much. It may just be vital biomass oxygenating the planet to you, but it's home to me. And I'm sure there was a rainforest around here a moment ago. Oh, yeah. Like, how beautiful.
I also want to put in one for, I really like the concept of, and footnote that explains, retrophrenology.
Yeah, yep.
That's right.
Which, phrenology being, you can tell somebody's personality by the bumps on their head, so clearly you can change someone's personality by putting the right bumps on their head. And I like the way it kind of comes across as kind of a dig at alternative medicines. You can go into a shop and order an artistic temperament with a tendency to introspection and a side order of hysteria. What you actually get is hit on the head with a selection of different sized mallets, but it creates employment and keeps the money in circulation, and that's the main thing. Yeah. So it's like, it doesn't work, but some people get something out of it.
I also really loved when detritus is turning into the military man, up you get soldiers, hand off rock and on with sock. We haven't talked about Angua dying and then coming back to life.
Yeah, that is a big deal, isn't it?
And I'd forgotten that as well.
Yeah.
Like, when I read it, I was like, oh, did she... What?
And Carrot doing it's personal, but that's not the same as important.
Oh, yeah. Because it's the whole thing where, they finally do sleep together, and then he wakes up afterwards, he throws open the curtains, and the moonlight comes in, and he turns around, there's a bloody great wolf in his bed, and he freaks out, and he berates himself for picking up his own sword. But and Gaspard later on points out to Angua, he's like, well, what do you think would happen? Like, you could have at least hinted to him. Like, he turned around and there was a wolf there. And you're like, that's fair.
I see. I interpreted it as Gaspard telling him off. I didn't interpret it as him thinking those thoughts himself. But maybe that's just a misread.
Yeah, I thought he was can't remember.
I thought, well, maybe it's a bit of both.
Is it when he realises that Gaspard can talk? Is that
moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, maybe it is Gaspard who says...
You idiot! You just pulled your sword on her.
Yeah. But it didn't. It could have been either. I think that was a nice moment where it's like they, he and Gaspard think the same way in a lot of ways.
Is it because she had no control because he opened the curtains and moonlight came in and she just turned into a wolf?
She does say that if you're in the full moon, when the moon is full and in the sky, she has to change. And so I think that's why it happened when if she's in moonlight. They kind of do set that up. But then while the moon is full for like that week, it's technically full. She can change at will. Yeah. And then the rest of the time, she can't. So, which is, interesting. And I like also that she mentions there's different kinds of werewolves. Yeah. Because I think from memory, Mrs. Cake's daughter, when you meet her later on, she's just the kind of always very hairy variety of werewolf. She's always wearing a big hat, I think, so she's not in the moonlight or something. She can smell that he's in danger, or can hear that he's in danger from a long, or not that in danger, that he's been hurt from a long way away, which is kind of interesting in itself, because they've only just met like a few days before, and now is it because they've slept together? Or
because he matters so much to her.
Yeah,
well,
I guess so.
The bond, I think maybe.
Yeah, she's imprinted on him. Oh, God, it's like Twilight.
He's her master.
Oh, no. But she does show up to save him at the end. And I think as much as it felt good, it also kind of reinforced this nagging feeling I couldn't get rid of, that she is kind of there to serve his plot rather than have her own story. Yeah. Because she doesn't really get an arc. Like, her arc is... I'm joined the watch and these guys are all a bit of an idiot. Oh, but Captain Carrot's kind of cute. Oh, also everybody likes him. And isn't it interesting the way I can't quite figure him out, but isn't he great? And I guess we're going to sleep together now. And no, he's in trouble now. I'm going to like jump in front of a bullet for him.
So in the Bechdel test of her talking to herself, she fails it still then?
Yes, because she's talking about it. And she doesn't talk to any other women.
No. Well, Mrs. Cake.
Oh, she talks to Mrs. Cake. That's
about
true.
Carrot.
About
Carrot turning up. Yeah. So no good. No Bechdel test for this book.
Yeah. Sybil and Emma talk about Vimes. They talk about Vimes.
Yeah. But they only say about 3 words anyway.
Yeah.
They're Emma's. So we did ask for people to tweet, and we only asked this at the last minute, so we don't have a lot of questions for this one, but when we announce what the book will be for next time, if you have any questions for us that you'd like us to answer about the book or about themes in Pratchett's works that come up in the book that we'll be discussing next time, please tweet them at us.
So we got a good one, which was, would you be happy living under the patrician? Is he a viable replacement for our current government, assuming he can work around S44?
I don't think, does he have citizenship?
And only one citizenship.
I don't know if that's a thing.
But he would kill anyone who knew about his second citizenship, so like...
Yeah, or he'd get it rescinded and then he'd have the documents backdated, so it didn't count.
Or he would just invade the place that he had second citizenship of and make it a subunit of Ankh-Morpork.
He'd find a way.
Solve the problem. Yeah, he'd solve the problem one way or another. But he does, as a ruler, he's pretty great.
Yeah.
He gets stuff done and he seems to do it for the right reasons. He's not in it for the power.
He's sort of described in the earlier books as being ruthless and everyone's afraid of him. But as it goes along, he's actually quite cuddly in his way. He is ruthless, but not without, cause.
Yeah.
And he clearly has everybody's best interests at heart. He's that sort of, he's that archetype, he's like that benevolent dictator.
I feel he wouldn't have done Manus and Naru.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have done that.
No, because he doesn't really have anybody tortured from memory.
I think it's just he has the threat of torture, which is enough. Like he goes a lot on rumors. Like, and he's got like that, doesn't he have a drop or a room that he threatens Most von Lipwig with, but you never actually hear of him doing any of the things he threatens that he could do.
Yeah.
But then again, you wouldn't because he's so good at secrets.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I don't think he would do that. It's not clever enough for him anyway.
No. But yeah, the shadows part of him is enough to make people think. Yeah.
It's like when I count to 3 for my son. I have no idea what happens when I get to 3. Neither does he, but it's been working for 8 years.
He doesn't want to find out.
No, because I go, don't make me count to 3, and then I'll get to 3, and by 3 he's doing a thing. I'm surprised it's lasted this long, but...
Don't let him listen to this podcast,
No.
or the magic will dissipate.
Not till he's 21.
Yeah. No, so I think I'd do all right under the position.
Yeah. But who comes next is the problem.
Oh, yeah.
It's like when he's gone, then what?
Because there's no wife and kids, and it's not like it's going to be a hereditary post anyway, because that would be a king.
Yeah.
Because if someone inherited that power and they were not good, then it'd be really bad.
And it's sort of, I think, and I'm sort of going from memory here, so this might be wrong, but I think in the first few books there's a different patrician, and Vetinari comes in afterwards.
Yeah.
Certainly in The Colour of Magic and like Fantastic, I'm pretty sure they mention a patrician, but he is like, he'll kill people.
It's during the Night Watch, isn't it? You see.
Oh yeah, and
you
that's
see
the
him as a
previous
teen,
one.
and yeah.
Yeah, because he's not patrician yet, but he it's not entirely. Oh, I think you do find out how he takes over at some point, but I forget how. And I think it's intimated he's there by agreement of all the guilds. So yeah, it's really not clear what's going to happen. And it's kind of, we probably never find out now because you know, which is sad. But that would have been a fascinating book to read.
Yeah, the turnover of power.
I reckon it's a perfect, well, not as close to a utopia, but fleeting, because once he's gone, you can't replace Veterinary. He's like a one-off leader that's not going to come around again for another 1,000 years. So once he's gone, it will descend back into chaos. Maybe that's where Carrot would have come in. Maybe that's when the Kings come back.
But he would have to have a plan, though. Like, his plan is not just, I'll make sure everything's okay until I'm dead. His plan is like, I'm going to fix this city so that it works forever.
Without me.
I think that maybe his plan is Carrot.
Or is his plan democracy? Is he going to bring in a vote?
But he has so much disdain for the common person.
Oh, that's true.
Like, he wouldn't believe that they could choose a good thing.
And you probably can't trust the Ankh-Morpork population.
Yeah.
No.
they would vote to make Ankh-Morpork great again in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
But that would have been an interesting book, though, wouldn't it? Imagine an election in Ankh-Morpork.
Yeah. And
He's got Leonard Jaquirm. Maybe he's working on cloning.
It could be the case.
Sorry.
maybe it's not going to be a human successor. Like, maybe it's a dwarf or a troll or a
golem who live forever.
Oh yeah.
Can he get turned into a vampire and then he can just do it forever?
Oh, that's a good. Ooh.
Yeah.
So many options.
Yeah.
I think so. In answer to the question, yes, absolutely. We would be happy, and he would do a better job than our current government. But now we're thinking, how could we get that situation to just never change?
Yeah, how is it sustainable?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. Do we have any other questions?
Do you have to be born into a guild, or can you choose one? Can you be a member of more than one? And what sort of guild would you be in?
Oh, those are good questions. Well, I think the first one's easy to answer. You do choose them. They're very much presented like schools or academies where you learn a trade. Certainly some of them have, conditions. Like, they pretty much never take anyone except nobility into the Assassin's Guild, for example. But that's a good question. I don't know if you... I'm pretty sure there is a character in one of the books who bounced around between the guilds.
Yeah, that sounds familiar, doesn't it?
And then ends up at one of them.
But do you have to have flunked out of one before you can go to another? Or can you be a perpetual student and just be like, I have
I think there is a character who did that, who was a perpetual student, but I don't know that... I think maybe they also had an element of flunking out and being kicked out of the guilds.
I don't know what guild I'd like to be in, though.
Not
Fool's
Fool's
Guild for me.
Not Fool's, not
Fool's
Fool's
Guild,
Guild.
sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. We've got two comedians here. None of us want to be in the Fool's Guilds. We're too smart for that. I would have been a wizard, I think. I like to think I would have been a wizard, but probably a comedy wizard. So I would have been not as in I'm really good at comedy.
You would have been a magician.
I would have been a magician. No, I would have been the wizard. I would have ended up in the high energy magic building with the other nerd wizards.
Yeah.
But also I would have been the one whose job was to explain what we were, not really to do any research, but just to explain what we were doing to everyone. Would have been, I feel like that's where I
can see you doing that. I can totally see you doing that.
Yeah.
I think I would be a witch.
Yeah, I could see that.
But just for the cats.
You could be a cat.
Oh, yeah, I suppose I could.
You could?
Yeah.
And hang out with the other cats?
Yeah, probably be a witch.
And you get cool hats. We both get cool hats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know which one I'd choose. I'd probably choose being in the Watch, to be honest, based purely on how much I enjoy what they get up to in the books. But if I had to live it, I'm not really sure.
Yeah,
maybe I'd be an Emma.
Maybe be an interchangeable Emma. Just play with dragons all day.
Yeah, absolutely.
That'd be a pretty good life, really.
Yeah. I reckon Sybil would give you good super.
Yeah, she'd look after you.
she'd be firm but fair, and she'd feed you well.
And if you did a good job, I think she'd mentor you properly.
Yeah, and occasionally she'd give you an amazingly valuable piece of furniture or something. She'd be like, I don't use this samovar. You have it, kind of.
She'd probably also make sure that you found the right partner in life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can see her doing matchmaking
Yeah.
for the Emmas. Yeah.
Maybe that's why they have interchangeable names, because then they can take on the name of whoever she gets
but
paired
then
off
maybe
with.
some of the interchangeable Emmas would like to be with another interchangeable Emma.
Yeah, and then one of them's got to change their name or it gets very confusing.
I'd very much read an interchangeable Emma themed book, like a bottle book. Is that a thing?
Bottle book.
Yeah.
It's like a bottle episode.
Yeah, like Monstrous Regiment, where you kind of never see them again, but just an Emma's book.
A bottle episode is not, as you might reasonably assume, the immediate and unfortunate result of drinking a bottle of something Cup Me Own Throat Dibbler has assured you has come straight from the source of the Ankh, but is in fact an episode of a television program which takes place in a single location, usually one of the regular sets that fans have seen many times before.
And I totally would read a bottle episode style book about the Emmers.
Just the Emmers.
Yeah.
In December, we'll of course be discussing another book. Liz, would you like to tell the audience what we'll be reading?
Well, we've been dropping hints this episode, so if you've got it already, well done. But after the popularity of it in the poll, we'll be discussing Mort.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, it's one of my early favourites. I'm ready to reread it. It's going to be great.
Are you dying to read it?
Yes, absolutely. This is my afterlife. I suspect what will happen in the afterlife. I actually think what will happen to me when I die is death will turn up and then we'll just hang out forever and be mates.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I think my perfect afterlife would be like. I'll be his new Alfred.
Yeah, you'll be his liaison, though, so you'll explain what death does to other people. You'll be like like death's comms guy.
Am I really dead? I'm like, let me answer those questions for you.
Here's a laminated sheet that I prepared.
I think that would be a good job. So we'll be talking about Mort. So if you want to read it, read it now. If you've got questions you want to ask us about it, send them to us via Twitter. That would be fantastic. And Cal, thank you so much for being our first guest.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Would you like to come back another time?
I would love to come back another
I
time.
think we'd like to have you back another time. So we'll have to figure out which one is your other favourites.
All of them.
Maybe we'll get you back to talk about the carpet people.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
But Sorcery also, because Sorcery is my first one.
Oh, yeah.
And I reckon I read that a number of times before I bought a second.
Okay. Well, I think that would be good because that's a Rincewind book and
love
someone
him.
at this table is not a big Rincewind fan.
I don't dislike Rincewind. I just find his books not as engaging as the rest of it.
What about the luggage?
I love the luggage.
I love the luggage.
I would read just a book
Yeah,
about
a bottle
the luggage.
bottle episode of the luggage with the interchangeable Emmas.
Crossover episode.
That'd be great. I could just imagine them opening it and taking things out.
Dragons.
Just more
full of
dragons. Yeah.
Just dragons. Dragons and cool outfits.
Yes.
The Emmas need cool outfits.
Good
And
boots.
so the dragons.
Sturdy
Joggers,
boots.
that sort of thing. Yeah. Okay. All right. And Cal, is there anything you would like to plug to our listeners? Where can they find you online for
You
starters?
can find me on Twitter at Calbo, Calbo. It has nothing to do with body odour. Every time I spell it out, I realise BO doesn't sound great. So Calbo on Twitter. I have a book coming out in July. It's a kid's book. I don't know what it's called yet because the title we were going to call it is now apparently another book. But there is a book by me coming out in July, which I'm very excited about.
Would you say Pratchett was an influence on you?
Possibly. Hopefully, I mean, it won't be as funny as his, but it's funny and it's aimed at kids 6 and up.
Thank you again so much. Please do check out Cal online. Watch out for a book in July.
July, yep.
And thank you so much for listening.
You've been listening to Pratt Chat, a monthly Terry Pratchett Book Club podcast hosted by Elizabeth Flux and me, Ben McKenzie. This month's guest, Pratt Chatter, was comedian Cal Wilson. Pratt Chat is produced and edited by me, with music and sound effects by David Ashton of Sample and Hold Studios. Find us online at pratchatpodcast.com or on Twitter at pratchatpodcast.
Pratt Chat is brought to you by Splendid Chaps Productions. We make entertainment for your ears, like the Doctor Who podcast Splendid Chaps and time travel comedy series Night Terrace. To find out more, visit splendidchaps.com.